And today we're going to try and sort of sift through the role of Justin Jefferson, first round draft pick, wide receiver. What will his role be in the Vikings offense in 2020? And then what does that also mean for Adam Thielen and his role in the offense? Judd Zulgad, you even brought some deep dive statistics to the table to help set this conversation up, written on your handy dandy notepad.
Indeed, I did. I'll put the glasses on and thank our friends at Pro Football Focus for sending us this. But my simple question was this. So Jefferson last year, in his last year of college, I should say, was primarily used as a slot receiver, okay? And so we have heard since the draft that was Thielen's role in, I believe he played in 10 games, missed 6 last year. So statistically, Thielen ran 72 routes from the slot, or 32% of his snaps. He caught 11 of 16 targets, 143 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So now the question was, what did Stefon Diggs do? Because Stefon Diggs is going to have to be replaced at least somewhat by somebody. It's got to be somebody. And my assumption is it's going to be Thielen. But he also, in playing 15 of 16 games, so keep in mind he played 5 more games than Thielen in 2019, Phil Mackey. Diggs ran 72 routes as well, so the same as Thielen from the slot, but that was 17% as opposed to the 32% for Thielen, catching 12 of 13 targets from the slot for 166 yards and no touchdowns. And now the question becomes, and Kubiak on the Zoom call that he did with reporters last week alluded to the fact that the Vikings do expect to use Jefferson like LSU did last year from the slot. So if that's the case, the conversation or the question then becomes, can Thielen, who was a slot guy a lot last year when playing, can he transition to the outside and become the guy who runs, as they like to say in football parlance, the 9 route, the deep route, which is what Diggs was so effective at doing?
So I love this. This is going to be one of our more meat and potatoes deep dive episodes.
This is football porn, by the way.
This is great. And this matters for fantasy football too. So if there's any fantasy football junkies out there, I've got some potential comparables for you. But just to clarify something on that Gary Kubiak press conference, did he confirm that Justin Jefferson would play exclusively out of the slot?
No. He just said that he will be used, that they're not going to. I think what he was trying to do, probably wisely, is dial the pressure down on Jefferson replacing Diggs.
Sure.
And so, no, he said that he will be used from the slot, but did not say it's going to be exclusive.
Because I think this notion that Justin Jefferson can only play in the slot and that he can't play outside and that he needs to be protected because he's this limited niche wide receiver, I think that's overblown because I've heard that narrative before. And quite frankly, I think it's wrong. Now, it is true that last year, according to Pro Football Focus, at LSU in his junior and final season, he played 870 snaps from the slot and 5 on the outside. So if you just look at last year, he's a slot receiver. He played 870 of 875 snaps from the slot, which is crazy. And it goes to show you 2 things. I think it shows you how great LSU's skill position players were and how often they were running 3 and 4 wide receiver sets. It is not the LSU offense that I certainly watched for 20 years up until last year. So those things are worth noting. But if you go back a year prior to that, Justin Jefferson's sophomore season, it was the opposite. 80% of his snaps were from the outside. And now I am not a film breaker downer, nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, but having watched some of the film that smarter film grinders have watched, if you go back and watch film from his sophomore season, he's running great routes on the outside. He's beating good cornerbacks at Alabama and at other SEC schools one-on-one. He's running nuanced routes. Like, he can play on the outside. Just because he played exclusively in the slot last year doesn't mean that that's what the Vikings have to use him as. And so I think when you're trying to figure out, all right, whether it's Thielen on the outside or Justin Jefferson mixing and matching, what are the reasons that you wouldn't put a guy outside? And let's start to check some of those boxes or not with Justin Jefferson. Like, what kind of receivers or what sort of qualities would you avoid putting on the outside? Well, number one is if they're just too small or too weak to avoid getting jammed by press coverage, like take Xavier Rhodes in his prime as a cornerback on the outside against like Cole Beasley or something. Like, Cole Beasley is going to get knocked on his ass on the outside, and it's going to be a problem. because he's 5'8" and 165 pounds.
Yep.
Well, Justin Jefferson might not be Michael Thomas in terms of size, but he's like 6'1", 6'2", 205, 210 pounds. He's not a small guy by any means. So I think size wise, he fits both in the slot and on the outside. And the fact that he played most of his snaps on the outside at LSU as a sophomore, if he's comfortable in the slot, that's great. But I don't want people to think like, oh, he was a slot receiver his last year at LSU, and so therefore he's just a slot receiver with the Vikings. I think he's more than that, and I think at some point we're going to see that in purple.
He's 6'1". So here's my thought process on where things stand going into the 2020 season for Jefferson and the Vikings. Ideally and ultimately, I think he's used inside, he's used outside. You don't care, right? But he's going to show up for his rookie year, having gone through, oh goody, the virtual off-season program. And so I think the one thing that's going to be extremely important to get the kid's confidence up and to have him be as immediately productive as possible is to put him in places where initially for a period of time here, and it might be the entire 2020 season, where he's comfortable. So I think what you're saying, Phil, long-term is absolutely right. I think if he develops and pans out, and of course that's a wait and see because we don't know on kids, but let's say things go great. I think by 2021, he's playing outside, he's playing inside, he's switching with Thielen. It doesn't matter. But my question for the short term is, what is he going to be asked to do immediately to make him as successful as possible? And I do think that assigning him to as consistent a role as possible for at least a portion of this first year is going to be important. Thielen can run all the routes. Jefferson probably can too, but the cornerbacks obviously up here are going to be far superior to what he faced in college. His comfort is not going to be there initially. So starting in 2021, I think this conversation dissipates. I do think it's an important conversation, though, to maximize what Justin Jefferson can do to have an immediate impact. I think this conversation's important for now, because I think if he gets there on day one and they're like, okay, let's do this and let's do that and let's do this, his head is going to start to spin.
Yep, I agree with that. I think, if it was any other offseason and you could, you get the benefit of a rookie mini camp in May and then OTAs and mandatory mini camps and all that stuff, you'd probably just have more of a canvas to put routes on a tree and have him learn everything. But I'm with you on starting him off in his comfort zone and going from there. But as we start to project out, what could he be beyond 2020? I think I've got two pretty good comparables that people that are now household names in the NFL and receivers that have emerged into their prime.
Okay.
I think Justin Jefferson can be a speedier version of either Keenan Allen or Cooper Kupp with the Rams. So Keenan, now mind you, both these guys, Keenan Allen ran like a 4.7 40 at the NFL Combine, and I think Cooper Kupp was somewhere in like the 4.5, 4.6 range, somewhere in there. Justin Jefferson ran a 4.37, which a lot of people were shocked by. So let's say it's like a 4.4. He's faster than Keenan Allen, but these are two guys that play a lot, if not the majority of their snaps in the slot. So Keenan Allen for the Chargers played about 55% of his snaps out of the slot last year. And that's kind of been his role. Like if you're playing over half your snaps in the slot, or running half your routes out of the slot, that's probably what Justin Jefferson projects as long term. A guy who's like in the slot a lot, but also can move outside. And Keenan Allen is regularly over 1,000 yards. Cooper Kupp last year played 2/3 of his snaps out of the slot for the Rams. Had a breakout season, 94 catches, 1,100 yards, and 10 touchdowns. And so could you see Justin Jefferson as a guy that he's super comfortable in the slot, but he's got the skill set and the route running ability to be able to play, and the speed to be able to play outside. But so his base level or his base place of comfort is going to be slot, where he's going to do a lot of his damage, but could still get on the outside. I could see Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp, 50% to 2/3 of your snaps in the slot, and then do some other damage outside.
Here's my question though: is we know that Thielen is a very good player. That's been determined. We've seen it. Okay. I think that Jefferson immediately can probably be an impact player in the slot if that's going to be his role and he's not asked to stretch himself too thin or do too much. My question is, how close can Thielen come to replacing Diggs, who was so great in his role? And can Thielen take on that role, if they just say, hey, look, you're going to play outside more, which I'm sure they're going to, but how close, and I'm not trying to say that Thielen is going to fail. He won't. But how close can he come to being the player and doing the things that Diggs did? Because when Diggs ran that deep route, and Cousins, by the way, has the touch for it. He can throw that ball. He can throw that ball really well. Can Thielen and Cousins consistently set up in the scheme to have the success that we saw Diggs have when Diggs and Cousins were at their best as a duo?
I don't think Adam Thielen is as good as Stefon Diggs.
I would
I
agree with
think,
that.
and even some of the numbers would bear that out. If you look at, like, since we're doing a deep dive into numbers and whatnot, um, Stefon Diggs was like second or third in the NFL behind Michael Thomas and maybe somebody else in yards per route run. If you
Yeah.
just want to base it on how efficient are you, like when you run routes and when the ball is thrown your way, or when, like, what is your average yards per route, whether you caught a ball or not. And Adam Thielen, so Diggs was second or third in the NFL. Adam Thielen was like 11th. So they're both very, very good. But I really think Diggs, like, the only reason why Diggs isn't regarded as being on that level of DeAndre Hopkins and Michael Thomas is a different animal altogether. Like, that dude is like all time great talent. So he's not on that level. But I think it's really opportunity. If somebody were to say, we're going to target you 160 times, just like other top receivers, he will put up the numbers that. And I think Thielen's on that. I think it's Michael Thomas, and then I think there's a second tier, and I think Diggs is in that second tier of talent. And then I think there's another tier, and I think Thielen's in that third tier. So can Thielen run some of the routes, and can he be productive taking over for that role? Yes. Is he as good as Stefon Diggs? Even age-wise, Thielen's older. I think the answer is no.
Last key here is this one. Cousins did not throw that deep ball as much as Diggs would have liked. And Diggs is probably right. Now, because Diggs is a receiver, he probably got greedy at times. And so I'm not saying that Cousins should have thrown that deep ball all the time, but there were probably times that it could have been thrown and Kirk didn't trust himself. Is Kirk now, with a slight downgrade probably in the routes that are going to be run as far as the speed goes and the explosiveness go, is Kirk going to feel more comfortable or as comfortable throwing that deep ball to Thielen as he did to Diggs? Because this is also going to fall back on the quarterback. Kirk Cousins can make that throw. I think you could say that for sure. What you could also say is, I don't think Kirk Cousins trusts himself consistently to make that throw. And I wonder if Thielen's presence in running those routes is going to change that or actually make that go down a bit, which would be a problem.
Well, I would say if there's any self-doubt between either one of those two guys, just put that Saints 40-plus yard dime on a loop in your head.
Baby, he can make the throw, man. He can make that throw, but he doesn't trust himself.
Pull the trigger.
Pull the damn trigger.
Yep. So, all right. Well, that's a wrap. If you have any thoughts on the role of Justin Jefferson and whether do you think Adam Thielen can be as good as Stefon Diggs has been with the Vikings? We've seen him put up better numbers at times, certainly. But hit us up in the comment section, youtube.com/score north. And we'll see you guys next time on Purple Daily.